All right, so I am here with Remington. We're here to talk about the new Danny Boyle film, 28 Years Later. So I saw this on Sunday night, big new release, and you texted me, Remington, I think beforehand, and you said, "Dude, we got to talk about this movie." So I'm so curious to see what you think about it. I this feels like one of those movies where I kind of have to talk through it with someone, uh,
Yeah.
because I didn't even really see any of the reactions that people were having to this movie until pretty much after I saw it. So just so just tell me what you thought of the movie, man. I'm so curious.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about it because I hadn't been on in a while, so
That too.
needed an excuse. This is a big release, but no, I think it's a pretty interesting movie. Um, like not in terms of like narrative, but in terms of like ideas, which maybe is a little funny because I'm on the record of having knocked like two Alex Garland scripts at this point. But this third one I actually kind of really like, and I posit to you, Dan, that I don't know, maybe we'll see differently when editing drops. But as of right now, I would say this is probably one of the best COVID movies that I've actually ever seen. This is a COVID movie to me.
COVID, as in this is representing COVID, or this was shot during COVID.
Representing COVID. I believe I would argue that thematically it is a conversation about like the experiences of the pandemic and what how we have, as a society have treated that period and come to understand about it going forward. Basically, it's sort of like a dialogue about said things.
Interesting. Okay. You know, it's so funny. I didn't even really think to read it that way. But yeah, no. It's so funny. I feel like I'm a little bit in the minority on this one, and I started. So I gave this movie a 6 out of 10.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot to like about it. I was just kind of teetering on a 7. I think there's just a few things that were really holding it back for me. So just for context, I love the first 28 Days Later. I never saw 28 Weeks, and from what I understand, you don't even really need to see 28 Weeks to see this movie. I'm pretty sure they even like retroed something in that movie. Something about,
It
yeah.
You don't need to see it. I would still recommend watching it. It's definitely the weaker of the three, I would say, but I'm actually a little bit of a 28 weeks defender. Because I think there's some interesting ideas in there about kind of like the war on terror and the Bush era in there in terms of like what it's packing, but that's it's still kind of choppy and stuff. But like you don't need it. Nothing that happens in that movie is like plot essential to this new one. Essentially, I don't know if they necessarily retcon it. But there's you can interpret the ending of 28 Weeks Later to mean that the virus has left the UK and has now reached mainland Europe. But you don't. But that's like it's more ambiguous. So it doesn't have to be that way. You just know that they never actually, because a big plot component of that movie is that they're trying to develop a cure.
Hmm.
And so you just know that they never actually succeeded in making the cure. That's just like the number one takeaway for going into 28 weeks to 28 years. But yeah, no. So when I first watched 28 years, I left with more of a mixed reaction, I guess you could say. I still liked the movie overall, but I felt like narratively it was very slight. Like if you think about it, very little actually happens over the course of this movie, and I'm like, you were trying to sell me as this like grand adventure story in the zombie movie, and it's kind of like, okay, so you went out, and then you went back, and then you went out, and you talked to the doctor, and then you sort of went back, and then you joined the cult. And it's kind of like a couple short romps in the woods, So I was like, I feel like I would want more to sink my teeth in to really love this movie, like a lot of people were doing. Um, but and the ideas that I alluded to, I recognized they were there, but I was less. I was less starstruck by those ideas, and also the very like bold and energetic direction and cinematography that also a lot of people online are very taken with. So I was less taken aback by all that, and just focused on that. And then I actually watched it a second time in preparation for today. Basically, I watched it on Tuesday, or was it Monday? I think it was Tuesday. That's actually why when I had messaged you guys about the early access Jurassic World Rebirth event that I accidentally stumbled upon in Times Square, and that actually crystallized a lot what I liked about the movie, and it made me realize that I actually really liked the screenplay. So I bumped it up on Letterboxd from a 3.5 to a 4, basically. So I think my original criticisms still stand, but I like more about it, so it outweighs it a little more, essentially. So I'm not a diehard shooter. Like can do no wrong. I think there are some faults there, but I think it's a pretty interesting movie, and actually has probably one of the best Ray Fiennes performances in his career. In my opinion, I thought he was really good in the movie. And a really good child performance from the main actor, who I forget his name, but that's a pretty good child performance overall. Jodie Comer's been getting some love, but yeah, that's kind of where I stand. You said that it kind of fell apart for you after first 40, or
No. So kind of what my experience was with it. Yeah, so again, very anticipated movie. I wasn't listening to really any of the reactions. I pretty much, from what was getting through to me, was that people were digging it. But I wasn't, like I'm trying to do with a lot of movies, until I see them, I try not to listen to anything or read anything, or look at Letterboxd scores, as much as I can. But so we sat down to watch it. I was there with some friends, and for a good, the movie was, I was sitting there watching it, and it was never really grabbing me. I felt like I was at a distance from it for most of it. And I think there's a couple factors going into this. So I think, to sum it all up, I think what really was holding me back from this movie, which again, I do feel like there's a lot of stuff I love about it. But the structure and the screenplay is what really was keeping me at a distance from it, and was really keeping me from locking in fully. I felt like I kept waiting for it to get its hooks in me, and it just never really did for most of it. So yeah, I think comes down to structure. It felt like the movie started 3 different times. And I was kind of waiting. Okay, is this the plot? Is this the plot? Is this the plot? And by the time I finally got, and then, okay, now it's like kind of ending. And like you mentioned, I think you brought up a good point of where, it feels like nothing really happens in the movie. And I'm totally okay with that. I actually like the idea of a smaller scale, stripped down story, and kind of what people have kind of been saying of kind of subverting the expectations of what a zombie movie should be, which I would even argue there is a lot of zombie shit in this movie. It's not like that's not a complaint at all. I feel like it's just not, there's not some big third act, raid of a million zombies coming at you. The third act is much more subdued and subtle, and I actually really love that. That is an idea. But yeah, I just felt like, so it really just wasn't coming together, because I just kept feeling like the movie just kept restarting from the plot. And by the end, and we'll get to this, there's obviously the the Marvel, and this is full spoilers, by the way, just for anyone listening. We're doing full spoilers. But by the time we get to the end and you get the Marvel level post credit scene where fucking Kneecap shows up and starts kicking ass, I just kind of felt, and obviously this, I was aware of this, most people were not aware of this, that this is setting up, this is the beginning of a trilogy, right? I just felt like this whole movie doesn't really stand on its own and isn't really that satisfying, because it just kind of felt like we were Aaron Taylor Johnson. It kind of feels clear to me that he's going to have a bigger role in the next movie, even though he didn't really do too much. And just, it all felt like setup in the end. But I think there is a complete story told here. So that's why, again, I'm so mixed on it. But yeah, it just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth in the end. So yeah, that's my main overall like criticism of what just really was holding this back for me. Just the entire time, I just couldn't give myself over to it. I just kept waiting to be hooked in, and I never, and like I said, there's a lot of stuff to like about it. It never really was. But
yeah. No, and I actually see a lot of what you're talking about. That's kind of like what I had, when you say structurally, like that's kind of like what I was talking about before, where it's a very slight narrative, and like I said, like we leave the village, we go back to the village, we leave the village, we go back to the village, like not a whole lot is happening here. And I definitely agree about the idea that like a lot of what happens in this movie is actually in service to setting up subsequent movies, which was like another thing on that first watch which held me back relative to other viewers who were like raving about it, because it's like, well, like this is, I feel like in another movie you would not be this generous, because clearly this is just meant to like okay, what are the new things that were zombie variants? Okay, so that's there, so you can have fun little side things and fun little fight moments in subsequent movies, right? Oh, like Power Ranger ass villains at the end, like, oh, that's there to set up a villain for the next direct movie, possibly for the rest of the trilogy. And like the idea that like, oh, they can give birth, oh, that's just a critical plot point that we are setting up for for subsequent movies. And the idea that like different people in this world have different ideas about like what the rage virus epidemic represents and what it does to people, and that drives them in different directions, and that some people's ideas might make them crazy, a la Dr. Coulson. Yeah, okay, that's also setting up further. That's setting up a precedent for further story ideas down the road, and even more laughably is, I don't know if you know this, but one little funny piece of like meta lore about the first movie, 28 Days Later, is that famously, Robert Kirkman, who created The Walking Dead, he has often been accused of kind of ripping off that movie to make The Walking Dead, because the plot of 28 Days Later is actually fairly similar to the first issue of The Walking Dead. And The Walking Dead came like shortly after, not too long after 28 Days Later. And so it's funny to me, the sort of like parallel evolution, because if anything, what 28 years later solidifies is it's actually even more like The Walking Dead, right? Because it's like, oh, characters prefer to use arrows instead of guns because it draws less of them, and it's like a quick kill, and you have to like target the head and stuff like that. And some of these like similar lore ideas, about like what is going on with the zombies, we're all infected, like all of these similar notions. I was like, oh, this is like even more The Walking Dead. So it's interesting how those two things intertwine there. So it's always funny to me when people are like, Robert Kirkman, you hack, who are like fans of these movies. It's like, well, are we just coming full circle here? But to me, well, I think all these things are true. I one thing, you can go on my letterbox and you will see one thing that I've been doing as a little side project is tracking what I call like COVID cinema. I'm sure you've noticed in your own movie going experiences that there's a habit to make films about like recent events, like, and usually obviously it takes a while to make a movie, so it's like a couple years removed from what actually happened. But like when a major event happens, then you can expect some kind of movie about it, whether it is directly about that sequence of events or it is about like a movie in conversation with those events, or something to say. That's a very common thing that has pretty much always happened in movies. Very, 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 very common. And so I was very interested in documenting what COVID movies were, because that's kind of like this major, like, society changing event that happened not too long ago. And you would start to expect more and more movies to come out, kind of reckoning with that. And so tracking them and cataloging them, I found myself very impressed with this screenplay, at least with its ideas about COVID, because I do believe it is in conversation with COVID. We can get into that further down the line. And because previously, actually, I would have told you before this movie came out, the best COVID movie was Don't Look Up. But that's just more speaks to like the lack of like solid COVID movies, that's part of one of the reasons why I actually like the movie, and it gets into like a broader point that I agree with about the pandemic. But is that there's actually somewhat like a dearth of COVID movies, and that they're the ones that we do have tend to be like very small, slight indie productions. There's not like a lot of like major releases surrounding the topic, and that's, again, there's a reason for this. So that's what stands out to me. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas, and then when you combine that with the cinematography, which is definitely part of that broader message, because it's not just a COVID movie, right? It's also kind of like a treatise on like British politics of like the last decade or so, right? There's definitely like that early sequence when they're like leaving the village, and they are doing it. It's like there's like that parallel cutting between the father and the son with various like films and also like historical footage with the Boots poem, which is a poem written by Rudyard Kipling, the famous British poet of the New Imperialism era. And that's a very intentional message. It's kind of like about like what you thought your country was going to be, what your country actually is, maybe the forces that put us in this situation, etc. So it's also the fact that the village waves the English flag, the St. George flag, that rather than the Union Jack, is very telling on that front too.
Yeah, that's definitely all going on there. I did I didn't really pick up on it at the time, but listening to and reading reviews, I did get more, context around that old footage that they were flashing, and about British history, and I even heard like some comparisons to like commentary on Brexit to an extent.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all there. And you touching on the COVID stuff, the other thing that I thought was kind of keeping me back from this film, and this is kind of an on me thing, just from my experience. I feel like I've been so invested. Now, I didn't see never watched The Walking Dead. But I did hear someone in listening to reviews and stuff, I did hear someone talk about how the first pilot episode or whatever of The Walking Dead is very similar to the beginning of 28 Days, where someone's like waking up in a hospital, something like to that effect. But what I did watch, and very recently, that I'm very invested in, is The Last of Us. And we were going to the theater with a friend who never saw the first 28 Days Later. And they were like, do I need to know anything about this, the context? But he did know and play The Last of Us. And I just was thinking, and I was like, well, I was like, it's a zombie like, some like a disease came in, and I was just like, The Last of Us, right? And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, it's basically The Last of Us. There you go. And I just kind of, and when actually I just talked about this on the last episode where I was talking with Gene, where my whole thesis of going into and again, I never played the games, but my whole connection with how much I love that show comes down to, I think of it in terms of like through the scope of COVID. And I think because they did something in the show that where like they tweak the date, it's a wink and a nod in the beginning of the Last of Us HBO show where like it's kind of meant to, the infection or whatever kind of comes right. It's like lines up with the start of COVID or something like that. So I always viewed that show as a, what if COVID actually just took the world over and it just ended the world? And that was always kind of my COVID media. And I explained to Gene in that episode, I won't rehash the whole thing, but I just always kind of was watching The Last of Us in that lens of what if COVID just took over, and what if that kind of the earth took over. And, as someone that's so terminally online and just seeing everything that's happening in the world, I felt a lot of comfort in that idea of because so much of The Last of Us, while it is a zombie show, the oxymoron of it is a lot of it is just watching Ellie and Joel travel through this very beautiful looking post-apocalyptic world where nature is taking over and everything's quiet and just the world is kind of nature's healing. And I kind of found something beautiful in that. So anyway, after just experiencing season 2 of The Last of Us, and that is a very flawed season, but I just feel like after being so invested in that world and viewing it through the lens of COVID, and being so similar, I just felt like it's such a distance from this movie. And I think that's a big part of it as well, where I feel like I had a outbreak post-apocalyptic world, and this 28 years later movie, from a screenplay and thematic perspective, just wasn't really doing any lifting. I feel like that was a big factor too, was I just was so invested in The Last of Us, and it was just keeping me. This script wasn't doing much for me in hooking me in, and like the other reasons I listed about the structure. But I'm curious. Like I said, I didn't even really think about it in terms of COVID, which, I mean, I guess that's kind of obvious, but I didn't even think of it in that read. So I'm curious, what connections do you think this kind of called to you, like as a COVID movie?
Sure. So to me, why this stands above the rest, perhaps, is that I think specifically of the scene at the Bone Temple with Dr. Kelson when he has drugged the boy Spike. That's the character's name, Spike. And he's like giving him the speech about memento mori and memento amoris to help make him comfortable with the fact that his mother is dying. So this is a monologue kind of about, and also that scene, and also the scene he had prior where he is explaining kind of like the purpose of the temple, the purpose of the art piece with all of the skulls, and why he's doing the things that he's been doing these past like I think like 12 years they said since the last time they saw Kelson, or was it 15, something like that. So to me, that is in conversation with, it gets to something very real about the pandemic, which is that there's a consensus around the idea that we as a society, we didn't do COVID so well, right? Like it was and this is true for them in the UK, and it's also true for us and many different countries, where rather than it being like a great rallying moment, we like we're always told we're supposed to do in national crises, we turned against each other. It was a very intense, divisive time, and because there were no clear resolutions, there were also no clear kind of like reckonings and retrospectives on the era. And so there's almost like this very unspoken consensus moving forward, which is the only way for all of us to move on and to get past all that all that death and all of that chaos is to just not talk about it. All right. And any attempt to seriously grapple with that is, that's going to be seen as uncomfortable and disliked and not a thing we want to deal with. That's why we and the lockdown earlier than experts would have had us do. That's why Democrats can't really run on being the we manage COVID party, right? No one really wants that. That's why we live in an era of like intense vaccine skepticism, like rising vaccine skepticism. And that's part of what I was getting at with the idea that we haven't had a lot of major movies that are about COVID that come out. They're all usually like these like slight indie projects. And the reason why I would have said prior to this film that Don't Look Up was the exception as well. Don't Look Up was actually produced before COVID. It just so happens to be lucky enough to come out in 2021, and because its theme happened to be about science communication, in their mind, when they were making it more about climate change, it can be read by a 2021 audience as also a COVID movie, right? Because so much of that era was about science communication and the successes and failures thereof, and the public's insane reaction to dealing with science communication. It's like a satire, basically, very legible for our times in that way. And so what's being gotten at here, and is an overall theme of the movie, in 28 years later, is it's about acceptance of death, right? And it's this this lack of acceptance from the pandemic era, because right, if you're denying it and you're repressing it, don't want to think about it, then you're not really accepting death. And so to me, when I hear Kelson talk to Spike about, memento mori and memento amoris, remember death, remember love, right? This is Alex Garland essentially giving you his pitch of like how we need to, the best way to heal basically from that era and like whatever repressed social traumas that we have from that time. And so I took it to be a very interesting film, and contrasts, I think, with the previous two screenplays of his that I disliked, from Warfare and from Civil War, where so I like 28 Years Later because I think it's getting at something real about like a major societal phenomenon, worldwide phenomenon. Whereas like Civil War, I don't like because it's sort of like contriving a thing about a real issue just so it can like talk about that thing in a way that it likes, and but also do so incoherently that a lot of people like it for like the opposite reasons that it intended. So whereas like Warfare just plays it very neutral, and so it falls into a lot of like the traps of like not really being sophisticated in the issue set that it's dealing with. Whereas like this, I think, is very intentional. It's very heartfelt, and it's also coming from a place that Garland perhaps knows about. Right, he lived through COVID himself, and probably his thoughts about what was going on in the UK at that time. And so. That's what it is to me. That's why I think it's a very strong and very interesting COVID movie.
Okay, yeah, it's funny. I mean, it seems stupid of me to not look at the disease pandemic movie where they're talking about quarantine and stuff. I just didn't read it as COVID at all, and I understand your read, and I get the I took that all the sequences with Ray Fiennes and the monologues and that ending, or the climax of that third act with the skulls. I guess I kind of read that as just more accepting of death and grieving and reckoning with that in a more broader sense. I didn't really see a connection with COVID necessarily, even though maybe that's kind of naive on my part. I just wasn't really seeing that as a commentary. But so, I mean, even if you have that, and then we get all this, this commentary front loaded about like, the British history and things like that. I don't know. It just all felt gestured to, and I like the idea at the end of there's so many things in on paper I like of just a more subdued third act, and just kind of just really focusing on the themes with the death of his mother. It just wasn't handled very well to me. It felt so clunky. And then again with that setup at the end, I'm pivoting a little bit here, but with that setup in the end, and then it cuts back to or when what's his name, Spike drops the baby off at the village, and you get like that last scene with Aaron Taylor Johnson. I kind of was reading it differently of like, oh, well, okay, so now like you're signaling that Aaron Taylor Johnson's gonna have a bigger role in the next movie, and it just, all of it, it just didn't come together for me in the end. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I just didn't get that read of COVID. I mean, I'm sure it's there, but I don't know.
It wasn't a thing that I focused on my first watch, but it became clear to me on my second watch. So perhaps a second watch may help you, since maybe when you're a little more removed from The Last of Us, right? So you can approach it from a clean slate. But like I was a big fan of The Walking Dead, so obviously I was sitting there noting all of my the parallels there with The Walking Dead, and I did see the first season of The Last of Us, even though I don't have a relationship with the games or anything. So I could see a little bit of that too. But yeah, no, it's like, to me, virus, quarantine, also part of it. The COVID era, as I'm sure you were well aware, was also a time of intense political upheaval, right? So like the zombies are kind of because they are victims of the rage virus, right? So they are kind of like representations of reactionaries, chuds, right? During that period, right wing extremists, whose path during that extreme time was, I guess in Garland's parlance, rage, right? Just hate, strike back. We're not going to wear masks. We're not going to do quarantine. We're not going to care about our neighbors. We're going to do what we want to do. And if you don't like that, well, we're going to storm the Capitol. Whereas when I had to think about this, I would say the people of the village, where Spike comes from, where Aaron Taylor Johnson lives, I would say they are kind of like Johnson's critique of, well, in the U.S. sense, we would say liberals, but in the UK, we would say labor. Whereas it's kind of like they live in denial, right? Because they have the ability to be disjointed from, the mainland Britain. So while they have clear rules, they don't have to reckon with it, right? So they just send people out, and then you come back. They've cut themselves off from what the reality of the British island is in a way. And they have their own rituals about this, but it's kind of like critiquing liberal sentiment coming out of the pandemic, I would say. And it's specifically in the form of Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, because he's Mr. Denial, right? Because his whole thing is, I don't want to accept that my wife is dying, right? I just want to, I have an idea, but I don't want to admit it to my son. I don't want to admit it to myself. I would rather lie to my son about there being a possibility of a doctor than let him know, because that means that I have to then confront the fact that we get a solid answer, and I would have to know. That's kind of what he's kind of the personification of that sentiment, where it's kind of the liberal attitude of we don't have to reckon with this. We don't have to fix this national trauma. We just know that we're right. So we just have to step away. So it's a little half baked, but that's where I think it's going with that. And there's definitely something very telling about them using the English flag there instead of the Union Jack. So you may not be familiar enough with British politics to parse that out. So the United Kingdom is technically like three nations, a little bit four, but three.
Wait. I just got it. Can I interject for 1 second? Sorry, because I like where you're going with this. But just to clarify, yeah. So no, I'm not familiar with any of the British history. I didn't even really pick up on that stuff until afterwards. Like I heard people talking about it. But so is the implication that when you say that they're in denial, or is the implication that they're so we have all of the UK that's being quarantined, or just this?
All of the UK is quarantined.
So
the implication from the like Swedish soldier that we meet, Eric, is that the rest of the world is normal and kind of similar to what our time is, basically.
Right, but are you saying that the island and the village that Aaron Taylor Johnson and they inhabit, you're saying that they're blocking themselves off from the rest of the UK, so there's like other people out on the mainland, like?
Yes, and we know that because Spike. We know that because Spike says, "Oh, but there are other towns and villages, right, Dad?" And he says, "Yeah, but we don't go to those."
Oh, okay. Sweet Jesus. Okay, maybe I do have to watch it a second time, and maybe because I was under the impression that village was like basically all there was, and everything else was okay. Maybe I missed that. All right. Anyway, but sorry.
The implication is that there's actually like there are other like little pockets of human settlement and like human civilization. And that society also, in addition to these pockets which are all disconnected from each other, there are also the idea of like roamers, right? So like Aaron Taylor Johnson has our line where it's like, yeah, there are strange folk about. Like we don't want to be in one place for too long.
Okay, so it's kind of almost like this isolationism from the rest.
Yes, correct.
Okay. I was under the impression, I understood the idea that it's just the UK and like the boats, like the whole place is in quarantine, but I was almost under the impression that this village is, for all that they know, the only settlement that is left. Like, and there's no, like, Ray Fiennes is just some kook out there, but when they go out past that bridge, there's, to the best of their knowledge, there's like really no other like settlements or societies out there in the UK. Okay. So now I'm following. Okay, so continue. Sorry, you were talking about British history.
Yes. So, all right. If there are any Brits in the audience, don't sue me. But to my understanding, as a reasonably informed outsider, the United Kingdom, right? That is technically three nations, four if you want to count the Northern Ireland, but that's a very disputed fact. But three nations, right? England, Scotland, and Wales. The process of forming that union involved like many centuries of like war and conquest, etc. But as a result, the flag that they all fly under, the Union Jack, it's that like red, white, and blue flag that you've probably seen before. You know, like James Bond's underwear. You know, like that type of flag. That's the Union Jack. That flag is politically charged if you are any type of nationalist, right? So in British politics, there are Scottish nationalists, there are Welsh nationalists, and they're usually tend to be a little more left wing. So you have like the Scottish National Party. You know, in Scotland had a like independence referendum when we were like teenagers or so. So that was like a big topic. Welsh nationalists, they have Plaid Cymru, that's their nationalist party. They want to, you know, secede from the United Kingdom and be their own independent country because they believe that the system naturally favors like English supremacy. And they all have their own flags. So like I forget what the Scottish one looks like, but the Welsh flag actually has a dragon on it. It's I forget the name of the dragon, but it's like piece of like Welsh and British folklore, basically. But if you are an English nationalist, you are usually a Nazi. You are usually a right-wing freak. And so they wave that flag that the village has. That's the St. George flag. That is what the flag of England was before the United Kingdom was formed. And so it's kind of like this idea of that they view themselves as like the last remnant of British society, the rightful heirs of English society. So they hold on to these like tokens, and so like they obviously like denial may have been too strong a word before. So like they are disconnected. Like they're aware, right? They have foragers. They have rules about like not going to go rescue people. They know there's a zombie outbreak out there, and they have a degree of ritual, right? When your hunters come home, especially if it was their first time, you have a big party. The people there, I don't fully know what this person is doing, but you see people who wear the masks, right? So that's like kind of like a ritual there. But it's kind of like, to me, I would read it as kind of like, we, the liberals, we survived the pandemic and we did the right stuff and we know what was right and we don't have to meet with or dialogue with anyone else because we are the good people and the smart people. And so
A
that
smugness,
to me,
yeah.
yes. So that to me is kind of like what is being said with their community. And then when you couple that with the rage virus being chuds, and when you couple that with the idea of there being a virus or there being a quarantine that we all must live under and navigate, and then with Ray Fiennes' key monologues at different times, to me it is a COVID movie.
Okay. Oh man, I really admire this read. I mean, obviously a lot of the British history and stuff, and I'm just not as educated on that, and
Yeah.
I do acknowledge that I was kind of like seeing when they were flashing all of those images. I said, okay, I'm gonna have to look this up. Sometimes like I kind of, someone's gonna explain this to me, but I do know there's something here. And yeah, but again, I just, and I just, it's when you get into the COVID thing, it sounds so stupid of me to say the literal logo of this movie is a biohazard sign, and it's a disease movie. That's an infection movie. So for me to sit here and say I'm not seeing the COVID comparisons, I know sounds insane, but it just kind of, it feels a little oddly stretchy to me. Like it feels like a reach almost, because I shouldn't even say that. I just wasn't seeing it as I just saw it so much. The British, the history of like what you think your country is versus what it actually is, that I all see. But when it comes to the Ray Fiennes of it all and the monologues and like him with the skull and all that, it seemed more of like a broad acceptance of death, and we are just the living dead. And I'm sure there's something that can be beautiful in that, even more of a broad sense. And to some extent, I do see it, but I just don't find it communicated very well. And yeah, maybe I would have to see it a second time to appreciate it more. But yeah, that I really appreciate that read. That wasn't getting through to me, and maybe that's due to a number of different things. And like I said, I feel like as far as a reaction to COVID, a much different thing with COVID. I got so much out of The Last of Us, even though season 2 was kind of a mess. I still get so much out of that show and hold it so dearly and view it through a post-COVID lens that I feel like a lot of other people don't. But yeah, so there's those barriers for me, and so I think that's where we're differing. And again, you're much more familiar with the British history and all that stuff. So I think that's where we're coming at it. But
yeah, well, I would just say a little bit of a counter is like, sure, no, that's definitely a surface read, right? That it's kind of like this broader emotional, spiritual acceptance of death. But if you acknowledge in the beginning that the movie has this larger idea about like what your nation was, what it has become, right? Then you can at least get to that scene being kind of like, okay, acceptance of the nation's death. But if you agree that and then if you also agree that it's like that commentary is connected to the politics of Brexit and the politics of just this general like contemporary era of like post-Brexit British politics of like an ascendant right-wing backlash, and then you can connect it to other issues, and certainly a subset of that would be the effects of COVID, post-COVID, as a accelerant of as an accelerant of that right-wing backlash, right? It should be noted that the first film, 28 Days Later, actually had a resurgence of popularity during COVID, right? Because people rightfully saw connections between, they felt like it had something to say about their times. Like they saw connections between like the government's inability to handle a viral outbreak, that they felt like that had something to say about the time they were living in. So it would not surprise me if, when approached to do a sequel, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland sat down and decided that they needed to update their story to reflect, the time that has passed since then and be topical on the pandemic that we all just lived through and are still technically living through. So to me, I don't see it as a leap at all. I think that's just text, both subtextually and textually.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that read. No, and I get it. It's just I guess for me, the way I kept seeing on a thematic level it and thinking about it afterwards, it just kind of felt like okay, so you have all of the nationalism stuff in one hand that was kind of getting represented all in the beginning of the movie, and then you have all of the commentary on death and reckoning with that, and I guess grief to an extent in the second half with Ralph Fiennes, and then it just feels like to kind of connect those two, like they almost felt like separate. It's like two different things, which is fine, to be fair. Like even if you can address a lot of different things in a movie, right? But in a movie where I already felt like I wasn't really connecting to it, it's like, okay, you're shooting out this commentary in the first half, this commentary, then to connect them in, like you're saying, like in COVID and like a post-COVID world, and kind of it feels like I feel like I kind of have to, like, you have to keep like digging deeper to kind of bridge that gap, so to speak. So that's kind of where my perspective is, but I do get where you're coming from, and again, I feel stupid sitting here being like the the disease movie where there's everyone getting infected. I don't see the COVID connection, but so I do appreciate that read, and yeah, I definitely have to see it again, but yeah, no, that's definitely an interesting way to see it, but I do want to get into a little bit of the plotting of it.
Sure.
So we have so first we have that big opening, like a prelude of the, it's kind of in the trailer, the Teletubby scene with the kids. I was basically all in right there with that whole sequence. I don't know, and something I do want to praise about that, because I feel like I'm going to be shitting all over this movie, and I don't dislike it. I think it's fine in the end. Like, it's balancing. But there's a lot to love about it. So I don't know what they do. I know they shoot it on iPhones, and just like how 28 Days Later was shot on like consumer grade camcorders or something at the time, which if you try to watch 28 Days Later now, it looks like shit, by the way. It's kind of amusing. But he almost does something. It kind of reminded me, and this was kind of in the first movie as well. It feels like almost something how like George Miller does with the Mad Max movies, where characters will move and it feels like they're almost kind of messing with the frame rates of just the characters. Like, you know how characters in Mad Max will like kind of speed up, you know? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like an effect. There's something if you watch in the Mad Max movies, well, or at least in Fury Road and Furiosa, where a character will move and it's almost like they rotoscope the character out of the scene and they just up the speed of the character's movement by like 0.25 speed. And like, so it seems like it's like jerky, like Tom Hardy's like jerky moving around. And I feel like Danny Boyle does something similar with this movie. But anyway, I think it's a really cool look and effect that we have going on here. I don't know anything. I'm just kind of guessing. I don't know if it's like frame rates or something. It just feels like that's what's going on here. So I was really in on the brutality of like settling back into this world of like, here's this prelude and the priest and everything. I was like, okay, we're back in. And then we get Aaron Taylor Johnson with his son going out into the woods. And then when they have that hunt with the zombies, and, you know, introducing you to the town, here we are 28 years later. Cool. And then when they go out for that hunt and, you know, when they shoot an arrow, it like the editing and it like cuts to like different angles and all of that was great. I love that. I even heard someone say that they didn't like it. They thought it was like it was being too flashy. That's style to me. I love that shit. Do something fucking different. That's where it's like actual like vision and filmmaking and using the medium to its best of its abilities. I love that shit. It's unsettling. I genuinely loved all of the look and feel and to an extent and I don't even mind at the stinger at the end when they kind of like they introduce the tracksuit mafia or whatever and they like start doing like Power Ranger flips and stuff. Some people will say like, oh, it feels out of place, but I don't know, man. I'm like, it's cool. I kind of like that. It's a little tongue in cheek. I can do with levity. I think you would have to go really, really over, like it would have to be crazy for me to say something feels like the tones don't mesh. I don't know why I never find myself saying, oh, well, these tones don't really balance. I don't know. I kind of like it when things collide. But anyway, I don't know if you had any comments on just like the overall cinematography and editing and look of the film, but I just wanted to shout that out. Sorry, we made it for a while. Are you there? Can you hear me? Ooh, I can't hear you. Nope, I can't hear you. There you go. Wait. Nope, hit the button again. I think I could hear you for a second. Wait, hit the button. Hit the button. There you go. Wait. No, I keep getting it. Wait a minute. It's the button. Hello?
Hello?
There you are.
Okay.
I literally was like hearing you click the button and then I wouldn't hear you speak.
Oh.
But anyway. So no, I just didn't know if you had any comments on just the overall like filmmaking and style of the movie, but
sure. No, I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved a lot of like the visual language and the cinematography of the film. I liked so like I think a lot of what you're picking up is that we're like cutting between different like takes from different cameras. So like one moment you'll get like a tracking shot, and then the other moment it's like very up close on the person's face, and it's like aggressively iPhone. You know what I mean?
They had that big rig, right, of
Yeah.
iPhones, or I saw that.
Yeah. So I think that's a little bit what you're reacting to, but I actually I love the lo-fi look of the first film. And so this kind of seems like a very natural evolution of that. It makes like the action like very fluid and dynamic. And I also love not even just that, like all those like red filtered scenes that they cut through of like the zombies at night, basically. I love all of that. Because
Me
what that
too.
so that's like you understand what that is. That's like it's not literal, it's psychological, right? Because that is like Spike's fears manifested, right? He's afraid of encountering them in the dark. He's afraid of them being surrounded, and also that image, that dream he has in the same red filter of his mother in the lake is like like a manifestation of his fear that he's going to lose his mom. Basically, it's kind of like a vision going into the future. So like I love all of that stuff. I think the cinematography in this is so good. It's so bold and energetic and interesting. A big highlight of the movie for me.
Yeah, so that I just wanted to highlight that because again, I feel like I'm gonna sound like I'm shitting all over this movie, but I really did appreciate all of that. And I was really, I don't want to say I wasn't fully hooked in at that point. I was still waiting, like, okay, I was settling in. I was like, all right, here's our new guy. Here's Aaron Taylor Johnson. Here's Spike, and there's going to be some sort of adventure going on. Okay. And then, I don't know what it is. It's kind of just, then we get I guess you could say I don't want to say it feels like it's not pushing the plot forward in hindsight, but it does feel like, I mean, that is a big chunk of the movie, that first half with Aaron Taylor Johnson and that hunting trip that they do. And I understand that the result of that hunting trip, what eventually ends up pushing the plot forward, is that they see the fire for Ray Fiennes, and that's how he finds out about the doctor, right? That is but it feels like, in looking back, okay, well, that sequence feels like it could have been a little shorter. I don't know. And then we got to talk about, can we please, for the love of God, we got to talk about the score.
I love the score. I don't know about you.
I fucking love the score.
I think the music in this
motherfucker
is like so good.
No,
like,
listen to me, all right? Because I'm gonna sound like, okay, this score was so good, and it was doing so many things, and I was mesmerized. I don't think I love it as much as Sinners, but I was really mesmerized by, like, it was doing this thing where, kind of like how it shows in that they're incorporating, it's almost like this experimental music, like electronic almost in some parts, but they're incorporating vocals a lot, right? And almost like these vocal snippets, and it almost sounds like they're almost kind of playing songs, but it's just score and experimental music with these vocal incorporations into it, right? And obviously the big highlight is the track Boots that incorporates, I've been listening to the score a lot, that incorporates the poem that's so ominous.
I love the use of that poem.
Oh, me too. Me too.
So cool. So in addition to that poem being from the 1800s, it's about the experiences of British soldiers in the Second Boer War. It was so like Rudyard Kipling, if you don't know who that is, he was like a famous British writer in the 1800s and early 1900s. He was famously very pro-empire. He actually wrote the Jungle Book, like the book that the original book, like he wrote that. Big time imperialist. But famously, he.
Sorry.
Well, no, that's what you were literally called. You were an imperialist. Like that's just. But famously, he while he supported the war, he became like very concerned with conditions that British soldiers were facing, during the Second Boer War and became like very disillusioned with the project overall. And so he wrote that poem, Boots, to portray the like psychological conditions of the soldier. Basically, like it's about like marching and like the deleterious effect of like constantly marching everywhere and following orders, and there being like there's no end in sight of like this like miserable condition. And what's even cooler about the poem is that the movie is using a 110-year-old recording of it. It's the most famous recording of the poem from a literal silent film star, Taylor Holmes. And like that's his like reading of the film. It's very famous, very well known, and it's so like well deployed throughout the movie. Even the trailer, the trailers are so good. I was like joking online. Obviously the full one where it has like the full version of the trailer. That's incredible. But I like the last round of trailers where they like remix it, and so it's just moving up and down again, moving like a dubstep almost. It's like you know, like an early 2010s YouTube video where it's like moving up and down again, and someone starts dancing
beat drop.
Yeah. But it's so cool that we're doing this from like a guy from 1915. You know, it's like so a literal silent film star.
It makes me wonder how the fuck has no one utilized that recording before? It feels like an insane like, oh fuck, like they got their hands on that and like, has anyone used this yet? No. Oh motherfucker, put this all over it's genius.
Yeah, no, because it gets at like what, because it kind of like says it all, right? Because it's like one, it's kind of like speaking to like so it's kind of like the psychological deterioration of the soldier marching in a large formation. So it's like it's about the zombies, right? So like this large deteriorating horde that never stops, just keeps coming and fighting and killing. But it's also about you, the human, trying to survive during this time. Now it never stops, and there isn't really an end in sight. We're always just running, right? But then it's also kind of used tonally in that opening sequence, because it fits into the sequence of kind of like that commentary on nationalism, right? Because again, the poem is remarking on a noteworthy war in the history of the British Empire, specifically done to advance British colonial interests. And so it's kind of like this idea of what your nation was, what your nation became, right? You know, that's why it's played over a sequence showing like scouts in formation and soldiers and over like I don't know what film they're using, but they're like showing some like medieval film basically in that sequence of like Robin Hood and stuff like that, because it's like a famous myth, you know, in British folklore basically. So it's very well employed, and just circle back to what you're getting at. Like I love all the music. Like there's certain
a caveat.
Yeah, like there are certain beats that like doom music that plays every time the alpha comes on screen. That's really good. I love that. I love like all the electric stuff. Even so this is actually like a reference to the previous films, but even towards the end when the Spike is like doing the narration for the letter that he leaves, it's like, the babe came from an infected, but she's not. You know, like even that's like really fun. But they do kind of do stuff like that in the previous two films. That's like a recurring beat. But
yeah, oh fuck, man. I love this score so much. And then again, cinematography when they have that sequence where the big slug guys are like the crawling towards him in the leaves, and it's like a POV from his like the camera's like on his back, and the music is just going I just thought, fuck this score. So anyway, so I was listening to a podcast talk about the movie, and they referenced the score, and they mentioned who the score is by. And I learned that the score is actually done by this is going to sound an experimental hip hop group hip hop I'm using in heavy quotations as reflected in the music that I'm actually familiar with. Uh, it's a group called Young Fathers, and I believe they are British as well. I don't think they're American, but I've actually heard their music before. Young Fathers is like a very very experimental quote unquote hip hop group that does kind of music like this. And I remember listening to their music years ago. Anthony Fantano used to recommend them, and I looked up the score to 28 Years Later, and the album is by Young Fathers. It's just them on the, and I was like, wait a minute, they did this entire score, and it makes sense when you hear like the vocal incorporations into all of the tracks. That's kind of what their music is like, even though this soundtrack is much more obviously like horror and like dread inspired. Their music doesn't usually sound like that, but I was like godsmacked. I thought, oh fuck me, man, this is amazing. But yeah, that was like such a fun tidbit that I discovered that I actually
I heard that it was done by Young Fathers. I'm not really familiar with them, so it didn't mean anything one way or the other to me. But I did really like the music, as we had been discussing. I am Gene may be able to tell you this, but I am tragically very musically ignorant. Very very I don't know bands and groups like that.
yeah, usually I don't either. Like this was such a deep cut that I was shocked that I actually knew of this group. But that was just really cool. But what I will say is there were a few points where it did feel like the music, and I'm only thinking of two really specific moments where it just felt like, and I think this kind of ties into the theme that you were just expressing and everything, where so what was actually happening on screen, I don't think the music was fitting. Or I feel like the music was making the moment seem much more epic and profound than it actually was. And one of those moments is when they are in this same first part of the movie, when they're running back to the village on that bridge. I forget what it's called. What you call that? A bridge?
The causeway.
The causeway.
Yeah.
The causeway. When they're running back to the causeway, and you get like the view of the northern lights or something in the sky, and they're like running from this this alpha, and it's just like sprinting at them, and this music is and it again, beautiful music, and it's so epic, and it's just, but I just felt like the moment, it didn't feel it. It was, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. Everyone, mark the time code. I'm gonna do it. It was insisting upon itself, and it felt like I was like, this doesn't feel as profound as it thinks it is, or as epic as it's like they're just trying to. I don't know. That's kind of, and that's also, to that same point, that's kind of also what I a little bit thought was going on with the themes, specifically all the British stuff. I was like, I mean, again, maybe if you're British, maybe if you're more familiar, it kind of felt like it's kind of, I don't feel like this story is as, you kind of, I just felt like you kind of got to dig a little bit to make these connections of like, or to what is actually literally happening in the story. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. But that was part of it. But I was a little, in that moment, I thought, I don't know if this music is, it's selling itself a little too hard. But that was,
yeah, I can see that a little bit. I wasn't as, I don't know, bothered by it maybe as you were. But yeah, I can see that, certainly. For me personally, I actually really like that sequence when they're on the causeway and they're getting chased by, at least just as like an action piece, when they're getting chased by the alpha. It's a great little piece of tension as the alpha is getting closer and closer and closer, and they don't fully realize it. And then they're running, and it's like, and like it almost gets them, right, because the people at the gate are slow to respond, and it's hard for them to shoot in the dark. And with Spike and his dad like so like in front of the alpha, so they have to like get down to aim properly. Like it's a great bit. Actually, a criticism that I have is, yeah, it's a great sequence in isolation, but they actually use the same trick 3 different times in the movie where, okay, our characters are moving along, doing their thing, unsuspecting, but a zombie's coming up behind them or coming up on them unawares, right? So like the first time they do it is when Spike's getting his first kill, right? Because you have the other fat zombie, I forget what they call them in the movie, like creeping up behind them. It proves to be nothing because the dad realizes that he's there like not too long after they kill the first one. He kills it, no problem. And then they do it again with the alpha when the alpha is chasing them across the causeway. And they do it again when Spike is supposed to have watch when he and his mom are out and about, and he falls asleep, and the fat zombie almost gets him. But then it turns out the mom kills it before it's too late. So it's a recurring bit that they seem to employ. They go back to the old favorites, and so watching it a second time caused some of those things to like lose meaning because you realize it's a bit of a gimmick,
Yeah. No, yeah, I get that. That didn't bother me as much, but I get what you're saying. No, yeah, so but those are kind of tiny things, but I did kind of, it just, again, it felt like with that use of that music. Again, nothing wrong with the sequence. Music was beautiful, but I'm like, okay, it's like an escape scene, and why does this music sound like it's kind of, it almost was like as epic and as sprawling as the music during Oppenheimer when they were testing the bomb. Like, I'm like, all right, this is not like that kind of a moment. Like, it's a little, you're overselling it a little bit. So that was one thing. But that's the whole first half. And then we go into the second half where then we pivot to, then he runs away with Jodie Comer. And then I feel like and maybe this is a flaw in me. Like I had to reset, and then I'm like, oh, okay. Now this is what we're doing. Cool. We're going to the doctor. We're going to see the witch doctor on The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. We're off to see the wizard. I'm like, okay, fine, but again, it's maybe this is like a flaw in me where I'm just like, I feel like I'm like now adjusting. I'm like, okay, now is this the movie? Was what I was just watching with Aaron Taylor Johnson? It felt like an extended, what's the thing, what you do in video games where like they just
a
tutorial like of Spike, of like, here's how you, it
felt
like
basically what it was.
It felt like an extended tutorial, like where that would have been fine if it was only like 10 minutes, but that was like a big first chunk of the movie. And now it's like, okay, now Aaron Taylor Johnson's kind of out, and we're going with Jodie Comer. Okay. I'm like, all right, I guess now this is the movie. Okay.
I agree with those structural criticisms that you have. It's kind of a clunky way to start and then stop your movie. I get it. It's kind of like you need to establish some of these things before you can go further. But it's like it goes on for like a while, and then to like start all over again. Like, you just went outside, now you have to go back outside.
And at that point, again, like, my chest was open. I was like, put the hooks in me. Put the hooks. I'm waiting to get the hooks in. But they weren't in yet. And then as I'm like trying to settle into the hooks, then we go with Jodie Comer, and I'm like, wait a minute. Oh, okay, like, please hook me into this movie. And I'm just not. And again, like, I actually really love Jodie Comer's performance, and I really love Spike's performance, the kid. But so then we go through all that. And, they're traveling along. And then we get we cut away to a sequence with a bunch of soldiers. and then we get introduced to Eric, I believe his name is, the guy from Sweden. And we get that whole sequence, right? And then that's when Remington, the hooks were starting to sink into me. I go, oh, wait a minute, here's the movie. It's like 75% of the way through, and I'm like, okay, here's the movie. I go, here's what we're doing. So I actually really dug Eric's character, and I thought that was such an interesting angle to go in, where here you have this guy, and I love that they explain it later. I love that we don't know the context of that soldier scene at first, and then we learned that, oh, we were the guy, because we knew like there were ships patrolling the quarantine island of the UK or whatever, and they were blocked off from the world. And I thought, oh, what an interesting angle. And not only did the character of Eric like bring a lot of levity to the plot, like it was genuinely funny, like the interactions they were having. And I love that. Like I actually really was enjoying him as like the snarky comic relief of like, why the fuck did I just save you? Why are you here with your mother? Why is she calling you dad? I really liked him. And I also thought like, ooh, what an interesting thing to explore of, here's someone that has moved on with the world and is experienced the world, you know, and moved on with like modern technology, and he's now exposed and just dropped into this world that has been frozen in time. And they go into that a little bit with like the iPhone, like here's my girlfriend, you know, whatever. And I like that he was not really their friends. He was kind of a little standoffish, but I thought, here's the movie. These three traveling together. And I thought, this should have been done so much earlier. I thought, fuck, this is what it would have been, like an adventure between these three on this mission. And I like that he wasn't like totally on their side. And I thought, this was the movie. And again, I was like, you could mine that relationship for so much interesting. Like, well, what does it mean to hey, like Spike kind of could have been like interrogating him. Like, what do you mean? Like, so the entire world like abandoned us to all die, and kind of you could have played with that so much of like, what does it mean that like the entire world just said you are all left to die for the greater good, and like, you know what I mean? I felt like that was such a good, interesting thing to explore. And they did a little bit. And then again, wait a minute, there's only like 25% of the movie left, barely. And then he like dies immediately. And I was like, oh, fuck me. Like, this should have been the movie. But what is your take on that? I don't know. That was my reaction.
I can understand feeling that way if this was... So, like, if we didn't have the structure we did where, you know, we're leaving the village and we're going back to the village and we're leaving the village and we're like, if this is a more traditional, like adventure story, then, like, yeah, that's exactly what the kind of character that Eric would have been. He would have been, like, the person you add to your party along the way, and then they're, like, the lovable scoundrel type character.
But, again, I gotta say, it's not just that he's the comic relief scoundrel, it's that you could mine a lot of that thematically of what does that mean? Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
But what I think is being done here instead is that the way that Boyle and Garland are looking at this character is he is disposable. He's not meant to be seen as an equal member of their party. What he is another vignette along the road of like their ultimate message, which is like acceptance of death, right? So it's the idea of that you met this person, he came into your life, he saved you, and right when you were starting to build an understanding, he is like violently murdered before your eyes by the Alpha. And so that sets up Ray Fiennes to then explain to them, like, you know, like, yeah, you know, you can remember the dead, remember death. Death comes for us all. This is how death came for him. And I will add him to my artifice, basically. And you can places the skull, and that's the whole bit with like even the throwaway line of like alas poor Eric. Obviously that's a Hamlet reference. Well, that's even more fitting because that's literally what that monologue is about. It's about acceptance of death. Death comes for us all in the end. So his character is subsumed in the thematic, basically, and maybe there were lost opportunities in maybe having more of a longer stay with Eric. But I wasn't as invested in that character as maybe you were. So it didn't matter to me that he died. I was kind of like, oh, he's a little annoying, like, and I was also. You want to talk about total inconsistency? Though I don't think this is false. I think the movie plays with it for a reason. I was digging sort of like the pseudo medieval vibe that British society had regressed to in the film, and so to suddenly see like an ops team with like guns and stuff come in, I was like, oh, that's a little jarring. And the movie's doing this for a reason, right? Where it's a way for us to understand like where the rest of the world is at. But so like to get back to just more focusing on the pseudo medieval was welcome, rather than having this guy like bitch about his phone and his like girlfriend with collagen injections, and like talk about like finance bros. But and also it's just like a different story. But Garland, because they want to keep it focused on like the UK, right? And so if you have a thing where there's just this dialogue constantly throughout the movie between like Spike and Eric, where it's like, oh, my world is like this, but my world is like this, and you're not focusing on the UK anymore. You're talking about like everything else.
Yeah, I think you're pinpointing exactly where we're differing. Yeah, because I pinpointed that, and I was like, wait a minute, that is a great. That was like and I like what you said. I do like what you said. How like it was kind of just a vignette. It was just it was just a small chapter in the story of like acknowledging, okay, this is where the world was at. But I was looking at that and I was like, wait a minute, there's a much more interesting conversation to be had with that character and that like just that outside perspective. And I was like, oh, what happens when you tell this kid that has never been exposed to the outside world of the rest of the world decided you are for the greater good, you are here to die, like we needed to abandon you. Like I was seeing like, oh, wait a minute, here's a good thematic, and what does that mean, and what is it to and like they're frozen in time, and not like fish out of water thing, but more just focusing on that, like reckoning with, and I love that, like, and even get Eric like kind of as an ignorant piece of shit to be like, yeah, I mean, this is what it is, like we had to, and I love the thing about like, oh, like even getting a little like, oh, I joined the military, about like why joining the military is a fucking scam, like my buddies was an Amazon driver and I thought I could do something better, and I kind of loved, and this is again maybe where he was just so accepting of like, yep, I'm here to die now, like we floated over here and now I'm doomed forever to be on this island, I'm stuck here. I don't know, I that was like, wait a minute, that's such a, and I'm not even mad that he died. Like, I don't think he needs to be redeemed. I actually like it when characters are able to pick them off quickly. It says that there are stakes, like no one's safe. Like, I do get that, but I don't know. It almost felt like I kept thinking, if there were a bunch of articles coming out saying that, oh, there were a ton of reshoots in this movie and there was all of this creative disagreement and it was just a botched production, I'm sorry, I would have believed you. Like, I feel like in other movies, it feels like, I just kept thinking, this feels like a botched edit of like this movie, like of what happened, like the sequence of events. I feel like I was like, was there other stuff with this person? But again, it just feels like it's setting up a sequel, and this was where my mind was at, and I don't know. I think a lot of people were saying, "Oh, I heard comparisons to I kept hearing comparisons to like Train Spotting 2, T2, where that movie was a lot different from the original Train Spotting, and I love Train Spotting, and I love Train Spotting 2, and I love that that movie was much different, and it wasn't like what you expected. So I feel like a lot of people are praising this movie for saying, oh, it's subversing expectations, it's different, it throws you for a loop, you think it's going to be, and I'm just like, well, in a different, I feel like, to me, I'm reading, that's fine, I'm not saying they're being disingenuous, but to me, I'm like, this feels like if there were a bunch of articles saying this was like a total mess of a production, of like the edit or the cut of like what sequence of events that I would have believed it. I don't know, but but yeah, that's where my mind kept going in this movie. No matter how much I was loving the score and the production and all of that stuff, but yeah, and then just the themes just feeling a little I don't know, a little like I kind of had to like dig for it. Like I had to reach for like, okay, this is the connection. But that's kind of where I was going with it. But yeah.
I don't think it was botched at all. I think that it was a pretty consistent vision. I think that it's structural issues that I share your criticisms of. I do think that's just what the final vision is. I think that's what the final screenplay is, and you either are on board or you're not on board. I don't think that it was. It did not come across to me as a it's like a botched production or a botched anything. I think that they got the movie they wanted, and it shows. Like I think that they were happy to do this again and come back and reapproach it. I think that I do think that the things do cohere. And that is a unified vision.
Just to be clear, I'm not saying it was. I'm not accused of saying it was a botch. I'm just saying if this was, it. I don't know. I just feel like if this was a different world where there were like it felt like in another world this could have felt like I don't know if there was if there was articles coming out, if there were reports prior to this movie's release where people were like, oh, it was about, I feel like everyone would be viewing it less of like, oh, it's subversive and it's a complete vision, and they would be like, yeah, it does seem like a botched production. I don't know, it just I understand they did make the movie they wanted to make. I fully believe that. It just I don't know, just structure. Maybe I don't know. Maybe the structure thing, man, was just really getting to me. But anyway, but then we lead into Ralph Fiennes. Let's get into Ralph Fiennes.
Sure.
So I was actually so happy with how they did Ralph Fiennes. I do think he was fantastic. Because I was worried when they were teasing him in the beginning, and they were, here's this crazy doctor out in the woods, and he's doing all this weird stuff with bodies. I kept thinking to myself the entire movie, obviously, okay, the end goal is getting to Ralph Fiennes, right? Third act Fiennes, as everyone's joking about. I thought, oh God, I don't know why I was thinking this, but it just felt predictable, and I'm so glad they didn't do this. But because I'm someone that, Remington, I love a nice hammed up performance. I love ham and I love cheese, and I'm like, you will never see me. But something about like the way they were teeing up Ralph Fiennes, I felt it so predictable. Of like, oh, is he gonna be like some crazy kook that then like has wisdom in him? Like, are we gonna get like Yoda in Empire Strikes Back, where he's so crazy and weird? Like, are we gonna get weird method actor, like being really going for it, but then he somehow has a lot of wisdom? I saw that coming 10 miles away, and I thought, oh, can we not do like this big over the top Ralph Fiennes? And that's kind of how they were teasing it in the trailers, like he's this big crazy dude. And I felt it just felt predictable to me. and I thought, oh God, this is what we're getting. This is where it's going. We're gonna get this crazy Ray Fiennes, but I was just so delighted where he was so restrained. Like, he was just, nope, I'm just a dude in the woods, and he was a little crazy for sure, but I really admired that it wasn't like, here's crazy Ray Fiennes. It was just, no, he's a doctor, and he's, a little in the delivery. I just, and the presentation of him, I just love that I can't believe I'm saying this. I'm really happy he wasn't like hamming it up, because I felt like that was the predictable thing to do. And I really love that he was just a genuine, again, in his methods. Maybe he is a little crazy, but I love that it was just, and it was just subtle, and it felt mature to me, even though he was bathed in like red dye, and like his actions of what he was doing with the bone tomb and everything felt a little like, okay, you might be a little off, dude. But in his presentation and how he presented it, he was very genuine and very wholesome from the start. And there was no like, ooh, I'm a crazy witch doctor. There was none of that. So I loved that. I really loved that. That's what I'll say. But I don't know. Yeah, what are your thoughts on? But
no, I don't disagree, because the film is not.
Do you get what I'm saying?
No, I get exactly what you're saying. Like I said, I don't disagree. I was just going to say the film is not trying to be Empire. It's also not trying to be the Wizard of Oz, like you alluded to before. It's actually Apocalypse Now, if you think about it, right? It's characters who are caught in a terrible situation, who have to go on a long journey to like a hard to get center. And then once you get to find an elusive character who's gone rogue, right? And then you get to the center, and it's that crazy, quote unquote, crazy character who's actually like this kind of like monk, who lives in a strange temple, and who gives you the truth, like what the movie is trying to say, right? And you have to reckon with it. Sink or swim, fight or flight. You have to reckon with that's the truth. And so that's structurally what it's doing. So you wouldn't have him be like kooky whacked out. You need someone who can convey a message, right? And it's like, yeah, you get the sense that he's not like, he's eccentric, right? But he's not whacked.
He's not doing like, he's not dancing around being all crazy. Like, I feel like in the hands of a lesser director, or they would have, or a lesser actor. And again, I love hammed up performances, but I just saw this coming a mile away, and I'm like, here's what it's gonna be. It's gonna be crazy Ray Fiennes, and I don't know why I appreciated that so much.
He's a great actor. He's also just damn good. Like he's Ray motherfucking Fiennes.
It was great. It was amazing.
Action or anything. And I loved his performance. I like remember the first time I watched it, when he first comes on screen, and he's like it's a mixture of morphine and then some other medication. I don't remember the name. It's like incredibly fast acting, and then like everyone started laughing the way he said it. Like it was so good. And again, like all his little monologues that he gives, very 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 good. It's a great performance. Probably the best he's been in a while, in my opinion. Which isn't to say he's been bad. It's just this stands out to me particularly.
Yeah, he's only been on my radar for the past couple of years, because I've seen most of the Harry Potter movies. I know Voldemort is his big character, but I don't remember.
Have you seen Grand Budapest Hotel?
Yes, I don't. I do remember him in that.
So good in that movie.
I've only recognized him as a name in the last few years with The Menu and Conclave, but I just kind of was like, oh, here we go, but no, it genuinely was an amazing performance. I did have a little bit of some issues with like, just I understand what they were trying to say with his character of like, when he sedates the alpha. I get that it's like, oh well, he's kind of trying to live amongst the dead, right? And I think that kind of goes towards that theme of like, oh, the living and the dead are kind of one, and we are just the living dead. And I get what they were trying to do with that, and but practically, I was like, oh, dude, don't leave the fucking thing alive. He would kill you. And then with his whole camp bone tomb thing, I kind of thought like he doesn't even really seem to live in a house. They're just kind of camping out in the open, and I don't know, like in most zombie, like you at least try to find shelter of some. That was just a wee bit distracting to me, where I was like, all right, I get the theme of he's trying to live amongst them, but a little bit of me was like, I don't know, buddy, like Jodie Comer and Spike, they're not. This is a very small thing, but that was just on my mind while watching those sequences. But anyway,
he has the underground shelter. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. He probably sleeps. I don't know if he does, but he probably sleeps in there. And he makes it clear, like, I try to keep my distance from the alpha, right? Like he calls him Samson, right? I don't know. Like, yeah, could you say it's just plot that he doesn't kill Samson initially? Yeah, I guess you could, but you could also argue that they've said it's very hard to kill an alpha. We didn't see anyone. Well, we saw them kill the alpha with like the scorpion bolt in the beginning of the film, but that's like a weapon of war, like a siege weapon. They had to like get a crew of men to crank that up and then fire it to kill the alpha. That's how hard it was to kill an alpha. You can't just do that if you're a single guy who just has his fists, right, and the darts. He doesn't seem to have a weapon, right? So all you can really do is immobilize it. And move on. And I also get the sense that he's probably studying them to a degree. We have a bit of like Jane Goodall and the apes going on here. So he probably sees something, academically worthy in keeping it around to like see what it's up to and how it works,
Yeah.
So which is also probably them setting up further stuff. But yeah, no, I can understand how maybe that takes you out of the movie.
Again, very small thing, and I do understand what they were trying to do with it. So it's very, very minor. It was just something I was like, very tiny. But yeah, it did have a purpose. I understood. But yeah, no. So I mean that the whole sequence with it's just, and again, but kind of a small thing. It was just kind of like it felt off kilter. This whole thing felt that this whole third Ray Fiennes of it all felt, and what transpired felt so off kiltered in a way that I loved in concept, but I don't think it was fully earned. I'm trying to express this in the best way I can, to where we see what he's doing in this bone temple of his, where we see what he does with Eric. We get the shit, and it's almost like comedic the way he just throws his severed head into the fire, and within like the skull cleaning thing, and it's very unsettling stuff to a normal audience, right? And I like that. I'm in one mind, I'm like, I really like this. I really like that this is very odd and very it feels unkiltered, and I was like, because it's a very morbid and almost barbaric kind of thing to do, where it's like, this guy just died. Here's his skull I just burned, and or
again, even more so, I euthanized your mom. Here's her skull.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Where when they do it with Eric, the way he just throws his head into the fire, like it almost kind of warranted a laugh. And then, yeah, the way he kind of just walks off with Jodie Comer, and then 10 minutes later, he like comes with her skull, and he's just like, here you go, kid. Here's your mother that was 10 minutes ago alive. Here's her fucking skull. In one hand, I kind of love that, because even in the theater, I was in a theater that was relatively, I could even feel the aura in the room of the audience is like, I don't really know what to do with this. Is really fucking weird, and I kind of like that energy that it was pulling from the audience. But on the other hand, I was like, well, I'm like picturing Ray cutting to Ray Fiennes just like lobbing Jodie Comer's body 10 minutes later into the fire, like and so then we get the moment where Spike puts the skull on the top of the temple. And again, I get kind of what they were trying to do with the with the idea of just the living. And again, I know you kind of more read it as a COVID type thing. I read it more as like of a broader just grief and death, and like we are just amongst the living dead. We are not that all dissimilar, and kind of making that connection. But that was the other moment where I don't know, just the big swelling beautiful music during that scene, and him just sitting with his mother's severed skull. While I kind of like the off-kilteredness and the oddness of that moment, I almost just felt this weird insistence upon the music of just being like, well, it felt like the music was trying to do so much heavy lifting and guide the audience into like, nope, this is a really beautiful moment.
No, I disagree. I think the music was actually most appropriate there. It was most fitting because it's like the push-pull of emotions that you're feeling there. I think is very intentional. Right?
I think you know what, and now that I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah, because it's about acceptance of death, right? And death is a morbid thing. It's not pretty at all.
Right. Yeah.
And these are all people, both affected and not, who have died in pretty horrific ways. And it's kind of like saying we are all the same, and it's like it's very spiritual, and so like it's hard to come at that, and so it's played in, I guess you say, an off-kilter way, because if you played it straight, it wouldn't have worked, right? It would have like almost come across as like insensitive or just like hokey, or unbelievable. Whereas if you play it where the character is in this like diminished capacity because he's been drugged, right? And he's just feeling and experiencing, not really trying to pass judgment or intellectualize it. You're able to accept it more. And yeah, I have to admit, when I first watched it, it's like, yeah, I think that would be a lot for me to be handed my mother's skull moments after she died. But that's like, but you're supposed to sit with that. And you're supposed to let it feel it, and so in that sense, I think the music actually is very fitting. It actually fits with kind of like this almost like spiritual, tribal tone that we have going on here, and then he's like ascending, like, give her the most important place of all, you put her at the top, because he's accepting that she's gone, right? Because his whole arc with her is that he doesn't want to lose her. He can't accept what is obvious, which is that she's dying, and so he has to come to terms, and coming to terms of that is that he puts her towards the artifice that Kelson has created, and the light hitting them as he puts it on top is like him seeing the truth, which is that the only way that we can go forward as a people is if we accept death and remember love. And just come together.
And I think talking through this, I think I do, because I think in the moment I did understand like it was intentional, and I think I do appreciate it more than how I'm trying to express it. I like that. I like that it is meant to be kind of, it is unsaid, like you meant to face, like, even though it seems a little barbaric and almost comical in some sense, and just how dark it is. I think it was because of that earlier Causeway scene where I was like, this music is being fucking manipulative. I think that's where my wavelength was at that point. But yeah, no, I do tend to agree. I do think for the most part, that moment does kind of work better. Just even just talking it through. But yeah, no, but again, and that's why I even just on a broader sense of dealing with death and grief, I do think there is a good theme in that, and a good, even if you're not like connecting it strictly to COVID, or just, I do think there is a really beautiful read on that, and I do love it. And I do really love that this is basically the climax of the movie. It's not a big battle. It's not a big zombie fight. I do really love that. I love that so much. It's just, it took so long for me to like, I was constantly adjusting myself to get to that on that wavelength. So that's why I just still was really held back from this movie. Even though, again, I can't stress enough how much of that, I fucking loved. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So yeah, I really do appreciate just talking this out. I guess the only really quick two things we didn't really talk about, and I think this plays into the theme, just the idea of the birth sequence and getting a child. What do you make of all that, of the zombie being pregnant and giving birth?
I go back and forth whether I wonder if she was impregnated as a zombie by another zombie, or if she was just already pregnant and then bitten and then turned. I mean, either way, it's like a medical impossibility. Like baby and mom share the same blood, so if mom's infected, baby's going to be infected. So that doesn't really, in the real world, that would not make sense.
I thought that too. I was like, yeah. I was like, wait a minute. Well, how do you know?
Yeah. But I suspect what they're doing is that they're trying to set up the idea that the zombies are like people too, and so they can breed and they have their own little like tribes and culture, and so that's something we probably might explore in later movies. And so the idea that they can give birth and that this child, this pure innocent baby, might represent a way of like the two worlds bridging each other and stopping the destruction of the rage virus might be what it's getting at. It certainly would fit thematically with what this film is, and so that's what I suspect they're doing with it. But during that whole sequence, man, I was kind of like, I would not be stopping to help no zombie woman have a baby. I'm sorry, that's a bit much for me. I'm not like I guess sisterhood, but like, come on, man, like we gotta go. Like this thing is gonna bite me. Like
I think in the end, I do really like I did end up really liking the inclusion of that whole thing with the baby, because it's that juxtaposition between death and life, and I did think all of that was really good, and I do really love in that scene. I was like, motherfucker, like Eric is the sane one in this scenario. If you are like, in this situation, like Eric's like, put that fucking thing down, I'm gonna fucking shoot it. It is funny, like as bleak as it is, and he just and again, like as much as I was pissed that wasn't the movie, I do appreciate that, like, oh, they're willing to just kill off a character really quickly, like, but so yeah, I do really like that moment happened, and I do like the inclusion of that baby, and I just I just wish, it feels like I think a lot of this could have been fleshed out more, explored more, if that whole first half with Aaron Taylor Johnson was just shortened like significantly, and that is just the beginning tutorial of, instead of this whole big thing and this kind of this weird bait and switch of no, he's, and again, that's why I left the movie so cynical, because they had that scene where he's not, and it's not even that's why it existed, but like the fact that they kind of cut back to him and they show that like he runs out to the causeway to be like, oh no, Spike, he's left. And it just made me think, no, that felt like setup to me. Like, oh, you're basically saying, don't worry, next time on 28 years later, he's going to be a bigger character. So I'm like, well, fuck you. And so yeah, it just ended on such a, in principle, it felt like a big, like cynical next time on, so where I felt like, so
how do you feel about the fact that if we agree that thematically what's being done with the zombie moms, it's kind of like saying like, oh, they're kind of like people too, how do you feel about the implication then that Samson's the dad?
dude, can we talk about the zombie dick in this movie?
The zombies are hung, dude.
Dude, okay. I like turned to my buddy and I was like, this is fucking awesome. We don't get enough fucking wang in movies. And just, they were shameless with the big flop. And
apparently, Danny Boyle said they're all prosthetics. They're
I heard that.
But that's so good. It's so good.
I
Wang
loved.
representation, dude.
I thought the hog. Thank you, because I was going to bring that up, but I was not ending this episode without saying the hogs on these guys. I said, thank God, because I said to my friend, I was like, can you imagine? And people are like, oh no, this movie isn't that scary. I thought, could you imagine someone that big with that dong running at you in a train car? I couldn't think of anything scarier in my life. I was like the most intimidating thing ever.
They say the zombies got no civilization. I say these zombies are laying pipe.
No, that was fucking fantastic. Again, amazing production design in this movie. And you know what I did turn to my friend, and I'm surprised I didn't see this, but I did have this weird thing immediately because again, I loved what they did with the inclusion of the baby. Again, on paper, I loved so much of this. It's just in the structural execution. But when they did have like the whole birthing sequence, I leaned over to my friend and I said, "Oh, this is a very pro-life movie." And I said, "Wait for that article." No, it's not. I don't think so. It's just
I know.
Here comes this talking point, but.
Yeah. No, like I said, I would not be stopping for no zombie mom. No, sorry, no sir, not doing that. We're gonna go on with our day. Yeah. But yeah, no. I think it works for what it's worth. The only other scene that I would talk about is the very end with the Power Rangers. Like, what did you think about that?
Wait. I also just have to bring up this is again just a tiny nitpick that has to do with the pregnancy scene. And this is a small thing because it's like logic stuff. It's a small thing that I just thought of, but it just kind of felt like, and I love Jodie Comer's performance. She is redeemed since the Bike Riders for me. She was genuinely great, but it was a little like, okay, well, she's only out of it when it's convenient for the plot. I thought that was a little, she's only with it when she needs to be. But whatever.
Whatever.
But so anyway, the last scene in concept, I love like a comedic, like all coming in like Power Rangers and doing the flips and everything. Like, again, I just thought, like, is this kneecap? But it just it felt so egregiously Marvel post-credit scene. It felt so like it was literally like Superman or Iron Man showing up and being like literally standing on a ledge, like arm on knee, like, "Hey boy, do you need some help?" Like, I was like, what the fuck? It was like they might have well like been in Shrek, like, "Oh merry men," and then they. But
I do agree it has a little bit of that feel, but they did technically build up to it. You do know
with the Jimmy,
he's the kid.
That yes, I did clock that.
Yes. So and then with all the like the graffitis, like Jimmy is coming, like the whole Jimmy whatever, and the carving in the dude's stomach that said Jimmy on it. It's kind of like foreshadowing like this doom is coming. And apparently I didn't know this. I had to look this up. But if you were a UK viewer, you would have probably clocked this reference that this character Jimmy is actually
I did hear about this. Yeah.
The tie to the Teletubbies and why they're like Power Rangers like is that he's based on an actual like British, like kind of like almost like a Mr. Rogers type person doing like public access television, like live action kid show. And he turned out to be a very infamous pedophile, basically. So that's kind of like what's this is like a big thing apparently like 10, 15 years ago. If we were British, we would have understood a little more of the subtext, I think, of what's going on there. But understanding that, I think it has a bit more resonance in that scene because it's kind of like he's still a kid, Spike, you know. And so they kind of like he's the biggest foe of all, and it kind of plays into this idea of like maybe in comparison to some people, the dead aren't the worst thing out there. You know what I mean, and how human beings treat each other.
Kind of like oh my god, so you're saying it's like one of those, well, wait a minute, maybe humans are actually the monsters. But
Yes, which is also what they're saying in The Walking Dead, by the way.
no,
So
it's
again,
every zombie. But
every zombie, yes.
but that's okay. That's valid. I don't think that's
Yeah.
that's how you do it. But no, and you know what? Even like again, like I just in concept, like I don't even mind that scene. It was just so egregiously like next time on, and I feel like I would have been fine if they did it like Luke Skywalker at the end of Force Awakens, just having stand him on and just show him last shot and then cut to black. Like that's it. Like don't do a whole. That should have been the opening sequence to the next movie. Like it just felt, and that's why again I felt, and then like the cut back to Aaron Taylor Johnson, I was like, fuck this. Like it just. Again, I feel like in hindsight, maybe this is just kind of should have been. I'm going to watch this again. And maybe when I watch it again, I'll feel more like a little bit more towards you as to bump it up another half star. But because again, I do love so much about it, but I just left feeling cynical about it. And I just never got my hooks in fully, even though there was so much I liked about it of what I was seeing on the screen, but I was still at a distance the entire time, but yeah. So
I understand. No, I understand. I understand where you're coming from.
I think it is one of the most frustrating. Like I wanted to be on the wavelength of everyone, and it just was those things where I can totally understand why. And even as I'm talking it through now, it's like, well, this whole structural thing sounds like a small thing in hindsight, but it just really, as an experience, as sitting through it, it really was like I'm not, and I will also admit, being so attached to The Last of Us is a big factor, just as in my personal experience. But so that's kind of what it is. But yeah, in another viewing, definitely not a bad movie, and definitely not. I'm excited to see where it goes from here. So
yeah, no, me too. Like I said, I bumped it up to a 4, but I definitely am not. Near the upper echelons of hype that it's definitely getting online. There are some real shooters this thing had, which is actually kind of similar for me with Sinners, where like I liked Sinners, but I didn't love it. So I'm not one of these. There's like people who are like, oh yeah, these are 1 and 2, and that's not going to change the whole year. I love these movies, and fuck you if you don't agree. There are people like that.
Yeah, I definitely had like the mass reaction to Sinners. Sinners was like made like my kind of movie, so I was so on board with all of it. But yeah, I like left the theater and I started looking up and like listening to all the podcasts, and I did thankfully I will say NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour, they did have some detractors on it, so I was like, oh my god, thank god. Because I literally was like, everyone was like 1 and 2, and like all the big shows, like Big Picture, everything I listened to, everyone was like, this is amazing. And I was like, and I saw like everyone being like, this is the number 2 film of the year next year, and I was like, what is wrong with, like, is there something wrong with me? Like, what am I not seeing?
Yes, but man, you are imperfect. You are insufficient.
You're saying this shit is subjective? But no, yeah. No, yeah, I do, but I understand. Especially after talking it through, I totally understand, and just being like, yeah, I do like a lot of this movie, so I totally get where other people are coming from. But it is just that I think it's just at the end of the day, it's the Last of Us connection that is too close, and it is the structural thing and the bait and switch with the Aaron Taylor Johnson that is just, and the disappointment of Eric and being like, this is where I feel like I wanted it to be, where I was kept at a distance. But other than that, yeah. So anything else that you wanted to touch on, or any final words of wisdom?
I would say consider a rewatch for yourself. Maybe give it a little more time and sit with it. Come back to it, maybe think about some of the things we talked about. But other than that, like I said, I like the movie. I think it's a very promising COVID movie, probably the best one we have so far. Maybe like I said, Eddington's coming soon. Maybe that'll change it. But I do like the movie. It's not my number 2 or my number 1. I don't even know what that looks like. I actually haven't given the movie 5 stars yet on Letterboxd this year for new releases at all. So I haven't really found my number 1 in a sense yet. Give it time, I hope. But yeah.
No, yeah, I have Sinners as my number one so far. I feel like that's a boring answer. I feel like that is not going to stay that way because I'm like, I need to find Dan's movie. The Surfer is pretty close. Because
Go for The Surfer. That's like a fun.
Freak.
It's a fun pick.
I was the only one in the theater laughing. I felt like this is made for me. I'm in euphoria. Also, yeah, Presence. What was it? Oh, Phoenician Scheme. I'm going to talk about that. I can't. How much?
Oh yeah, I was surprised that you liked that.
How much have I been going? How much have I been going on? I hate Wes Anderson arc.
Yeah,
I can't believe this is the Wes Anderson I love. But anyway, I'm going to talk about that later. But yeah, no, there's I got a good solid top like 6 movies on my list right now that I'm like, I think these are pretty great. But we'll see. Real quick, Danny Boyle. I love Train Spotting. I love Sunshine. I love T2. I don't know. I don't really know. I have to rewatch Slumdog, but anything that you really thoughts on Danny Boyle?
I'm kind of underversed in his movies.
Me too.
Besides this, I've only seen 28 Days Later and 127 Hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not Train Spotting.
No, I haven't seen any of the Train Spottings or Slumdog. Yeah, no, I don't. I have more to catch up with him. He's been interesting for me because I've always heard like incredible things about the Train Spotting movies, and he was like a really big deal in the 2000s, you know, especially with Slumdog. And I saw 28 Days Later like months ago in anticipation of this, and then I saw 127 Hours because it's part of. I may have talked to you about this before, but I have like a very large list of movies that I'm like for the 2010s that I'm like trying to like get caught up on and stuff, and 127 Hours is on my 2010 list basically as part of that master list because that got into Best Picture that year.
Yeah, in my mind, it's funny. I always get, I don't know why, I just always get Danny Boyle and Steven Soderbergh mixed up. And I always think, which one did Train Spotting and which one did the Oceans movies? At this point, I think I would say like I'm a little underversed on Danny Boyle. I would say probably more of a Soderbergh fan. Not a fan of 127 Hours. Miss me with that shit. Sunshine I watched recently, really liked, really good movie. It's a little divisive, I think, but Steve Jobs, I think I've seen that. I don't really remember caring. But yeah, he had that movie Yesterday a few years ago that I think people didn't really like at all. And
I didn't see Yesterday, but I remember seeing the trailer like back in the day and being like, that looks stupid.
It feels like in my mind when I think Danny Boyle, just looking at his filmography, I think because I love Train Spotting and I love Train Spotting too. Train Spotting was on my top 50 for a long time. In fact, it might still be. I don't know. It might be low on there, but it's great. But I was like, wait a minute. Oh, Danny Boyle, the only real like masterpiece is like Train Spotting to me and T2. So like his name gets brought up a lot. And I think, wait a minute, but he doesn't, I don't think he really has that much under his belt. And 28 Days and Slumdog I saw years ago. I have to rewatch. But anyway, so yeah. But yeah, so we'll see what goes on with Mr. Boyle in the future. But anyway, Remington, thank you so much for having this chat, man. Always love having you on. Total pleasure. This will probably just be its own solo episode. I will probably just release this because I have a big one coming up where I do a bunch of catch up on a bunch of things. But tell everyone, where can the people find you, good sir?
I am at Angrier every day on Twitter. You can also find me rspore on Letterboxd. So get at me, roast me, have my talk. I talk about politics. I talk about film. Let's do it.
That's right. Damn right. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for listening. And we will be back. I don't know when I'm putting this out, but we will be back soon. So, bye everyone. I love you.